Hello, my dear friends. You hear the hooves first slow, deliberate and echoing off cobbled stone like a solemn drumbeat. The procession is already winding through the crooked streets of old Bavaria. Behind the creaking wheels of a gilded hearse, a crowd gathers in velvet and lace, clutching sprigs of rosemary and dabbing their nostrils with scented handkerchiefs. It's supposed to be elegant, refined, dignified. But the air tells you something else entirely. There's a thickness to it like sweet wine left too long in the sun. Cloying. Sour. The flowers can't hide it. Neither can the incense. Beneath the wafting lavender and bergamot is a sharper note one you know instinctively, even if you've never smelled it quite like this. It's the unmistakable tang of something human, dead, and not entirely sealed away. You're not just watching a funeral. You're inside it now. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do. Yeah. Picture the carriage. Polished black wood, wheels shined like obsidian. A painted angel atop the roof stares down with blind eyes. Two footmen stand stiff, powdered, and far too pale in the August heat. You're shoulder to shoulder with fellow mourners, crushed between corsets and cravats, feeling the sweat bead behind your knees. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't walk, you trudge. Through mud. Through clumps of hay meant to soak up the city's filth. Ahead of you, the coffin lurches over a rut, sending a brief metallic rattle through the air. That's not metal. That's the sound of wood joints straining under unexpected weight. No one talks about it, of course. No one asks why the coffin is already dripping. Ears dripping. Under that lavish crimson cloth, behind the silver handles and the gilded crucifix, there's a body doing what bodies do. In the humid Bavarian summer, it begins almost immediately. Skin loosens. Organs slip from their compartments. Jas builds. If you were to lift the edge of the velvet, you'd likely see something oozing through the joints, a yellowish sheen, maybe a soft spot where the lacquer has bubbled. No one wants to admit it, but everyone sees it. The glamorous illusion. A noble's final journey, accompanied by pomp, ritual, and music. It's a sacred farewell wrapped in ecclesiastical dignity and family legacy. Crowds gather to show reverence. Children are hoisted onto shoulders to witness tradition. The town square becomes a living museum of grief and pride. The shocking reality. You're standing in a slow-moving perfume cloud, crafted from desperation and denial. The rich have better funerals only in theory. In practice, they just rot in nicer boxes. And the boxes, ironically, make things worse. Airtight coffins aren't a thing in 1740s Bavaria, not really. They're fancy. They're decorative. But they don't breathe, and bodies trapped inside will swell until the lid bows. Sometimes it cracks, loudly. The crowd pretends not to hear. And what do? Standing there, inching toward the churchyard, you breathe through your mouth. You dab lavender oil on your wrists. You lean away from the coffin when it passes and feel the guilt creep in behind the relief. Because death is supposed to be solemn, not sticky, not leaky. The why is a cocktail of theology and theatricality. In Bavarian Catholic tradition, the funeral procession wasn't just a final honor, it was a public demonstration of divine order. The body, displayed in motion, proved continuity. The church presided over death just as it presided over birth and marriage. The rich went first, the poor followed or didn't get one at all. But behind the choreography was panic, because everyone knew what came next, and no one could admit it. You pass under a linen banner strung between two balconies. It bears the family crest of the deceased, black and gold, stitched with thread, blessed by a bishop. But below the embroidery, flies gather. They've already found their way under the cloth. One lands on your collar. You try not to flinch. A child beside you asks, "Why does it smell like sausages?" His mother hushes him, eyes wide with fear rather than offense. You hear sniffling. Not from grief, from nausea. Someone further up the line has discreetly bent over behind a horse trough. You turn away, and still the bells toll. It's strange, isn't it? You think of funerals as quiet affairs. Hushed. Reverent. But here, in 18th century Bavaria, it's a full sensory onslaught. Clanging bells, trumpets, choral chants, the incense, perfume, heat. And always, behind it all, the clinging undertone of rot. It's the hidden percussion of the ritual. The one note no one can stop hearing once they've heard it. As you near the church doors, the odour intensifies. The interior is cool and dark, but it carries its own aroma: damp stone, melted wax, and something older. The coffin is lifted, staggeringly, and borne through the threshold like a reluctant guest. You're ushered in behind it. Here, the procession slows, and with that, our journey continues deeper into the church, into the silence of prayers, and into the illusion of peace. But don't get too comfortable just yet. You haven't seen the crypt. You step into the church, and everything shifts. The sunlight vanishes behind stained glass saints, their jewel-toned eyes gazing downward like they already know what's about to happen. The crowd murmurs and rustles, corsets creaking, boots scraping on the stone floor. The air is thicker here and not warmer, just more saturated, like it's been soaked in centuries of incense and sorrow. The coffin is placed on a dais flanked by brass candelabras. Wax dribbles down like tears from the burning tapers, illuminating the gold-embroidered cloth draped over the corpse. Everything glimmers. From a distance, it's glorious. But you're not at a distance. You're close enough to see the sheen of moisture where the velvet meets the wood. You smell the perfume again, sweet, citrusy, expensive. It's stronger, now, as if someone doused the area around the coffin in Cloying. The glamorous illusion is hard at work. The deceased noble appears to be resting in stately repose, ready to be commended into the arms of angels. Except they've also packed the coffin with dried herbs and rosemary. Which is odd, because you're pretty sure this man was embalmed. Or at least they said he was. Embalming in Bavaria during the 18th century was largely ceremonialist, about preservation and more about ritual. They drain a little blood, perhaps pack the cavities with wine-soaked cloth and sew the body shut. Enough to say it was done. But not enough to stop what happens next. And what happens next is always the same. The body bloats. You can't stop looking at the hands, those pale, folded, waxy hands. The lace cuffs barely conceal the fact that the knuckles have ballooned. The ring on. His finger is pressing deep into the skin, like it's being swallowed. You don't say anything. No one does. Because this is dying in style. To be buried as a noble in 18th century Bavaria was to perform a final role in the family legacy. The clothes matted embroidered waistcoat, wig powdered one last time, maybe even a splash of rouge to give the illusion of health. But underneath it all, decay waits patiently. You imagine it now, the silk shirt clinging to liquefying muscle, the fabric absorbing moisture, collapsing into the chest cavity. And still, to everyone else, he is beautiful. The glamour is maintained at all costs. Mourning attendants discreetly dab scented cloths against the coffin's edges. A priest swings a thurible with practiced grace, sending arcs of holy smoke into the air. You breathe it in, the spicy tang of frankincense, meant to sanctify the space, and also, you suspect, to cover what the corpse is releasing. The shocking reality. The nobler the body, the more elaborate the dressing, the faster the rot. Layers of fabric trap moisture. The powdered wig holds heat. Cosmetics leach into the skin and interact with decay in strange ways. Some nobles were entombed in their court attire, complete with shoes and stockings, which meant their bodies often decomposed unevenly. Mold would grow beneath the garments, but hands and faces exposed to air might mummify slightly, giving a grotesque appearance of life. You've heard whispers of noble corpses so puffed and distorted that their coffins had to be resealed mid-service. Or worse, left closed entirely, with portraits laid on top so the mourners could pretend. But why? Why not simplify? Why not bury the dead quickly? Plainly. Because every thread, every jewel, every velvet ribbon was a declaration. This family matters. The funeral was a public reaffirmation of power. It reminded the community who owned the land, who held the titles, who would take the reins next. To see a noble in decay was to acknowledge that titles die too, and that was unthinkable. So they concealed. They disguised. They powdered the cheeks and perfumed the rot. You hear a sniffle nearby. A woman dabs her eyes behind a lace veil. Her sobs are real, but even her tears seem rehearsed, falling on cue. You wonder how long she's been wearing black. Maybe days. Maybe hours. No one asked if she wanted to be here. As the nobleman's niece or cousin or neighbour, she's expected to attend. Expected to bear witness to his elegance, even in death. You look up at the frescoes above the altar. Angels float in plaster clouds, painted in pastels, eyes fixed on some unseen paradise. They don't look down. Lucky them. The organ groans into life. The priest begins the Latin. The crowd rises. You follow, legs stiff, back aching from standing too long. As the service continues, your gaze drifts back to the coffin. And now you see it. A small stain, dark and spreading, at the corner where the wood meets the hinge. The lacquer is buckling slightly. A small fly lands there, unbothered by ceremony. You glance around. No one else moves. They've all agreed to ignore it. You wonder what it's like inside that box. Not metaphorically, literally. Is his mouth still shut? Did they sew it? Or simply press it closed and hope? Are his eyes fixed in a peaceful gaze? Or did they forget the coin over one and now it stares, half-lidded and accusing? Dying in style is a lie. You feel it now, creeping up the back of your throat like bile. The illusion holds for now. But soon, the mass will end. The casket will descend, and what waits beneath the floor, in the damp and the dark, will make even this seem tame. So steel yourself. The stairs are coming, and they only go down. The crowd begins to thin. Whispers flutter like moths between stone columns as family members move forward to follow the coffin. You step into the slow stream of black silk and rustling lace, your footsteps echoing off the flagstone. And then, you feel it slight shift in air pressure as you approach the entrance to the crypt. The stairs are narrow, worn into shallow curves by centuries of grief. A small iron gate creaks open. Two men with brass keys nod silently, ushering mourners downward. You hesitate just a moment before following, your hand grazing the cold stone wall for balance. The scent hits instantly. Not new. Not sudden. Just stronger now. It's the smell of wet limestone and old incense soaked into the walls, but beneath that a thickness, a coppery tang. The air is still. Too still. It feels like nothing has moved here in decades, and yet you know what lies ahead is anything but peaceful. As you descend into the crypt, candlelight flickers against plastered skulls and crude saints carved into alcoves. There's no beauty here, not really. Just the pretense of holiness. You hear a soft thump above someone closing the crypt door. The light dims further. The temperature drops, and your shoes hit the damp stone floor of this underground chamber. Welcome to the underbelly of reverence. This is where the most noble, the most pious, the most blessed dead are sent. This is where their bones are stacked, their coffins laid in row after row of sacred rot. A sanctified storage closet of the elite dead. The glamorous illusion that a crypt beneath a church is the highest form of rest. That it is serene, protected, that the soul rises while the body slumbers cleanly, untouched, in the dark. The shocking reality. These vaults are fermentation chambers. Not intentionally, but inevitably. The thick stone traps humidity. The air doesn't circulate. The oil from ancient torches lingers on the walls, giving the entire room the feel of a used frying pan left out overnight. Mould creeps along seams. Stains form where coffins have leaked some so badly that the pooling body fluids have eaten into the mortar itself. You don't walk freely here. You dodge puddles. The worst smell isn't the rot. It's the mildew. You pass a series of coffins stacked too high. The top one appears intact, though its varnish has dulled and the crucifix nailed to its lid has begun to rust. But the lower one, well, You wouldn't notice at first. Not until your boot slides slightly. Just a slick patch, dark and sticky. You look down. Is that? You look away. You already know. Each coffin holds not just a body, but a story, a collapse. They were placed here in silk and pride, but gravity and time had other ideas. Some of these boxes were sealed with wax, some with nothing more than wooden pins. None of them can hold back nature forever. You see a plaque, Graf Wilhelm von Trachtenstein, 1728-1779. A noble name. A powerful one. The kind of man who never waited in line, who never lifted a finger. And yet, now he is sloshing in his own juices. The box beneath his name bulges slightly on one side, the wood soft and bowed. One of the brass handles has popped free, hanging askew like a limp arm. No one talks about what happens to their faces. The eye sockets collapse first. Then the cheeks. Sometimes the nose caves in entirely. But if the head rests just right, propped by pillows or ornamental padding, it liquefies slowly. Sometimes it drips sideways and leaves a streak inside the coffin lining. A noble smear, soaked into imported silk. Why would anyone choose this? Because eternity was supposed to smell like frankincense, not wet sheep. The theology of the time insisted that burial beneath the church brought one closer to God. Physically. Literally. The holier the ground, the better the chances for a clean passage to heaven. Being buried inside under the altar, near the bones of saints, was the ultimate spiritual privilege. But the theology didn't understand bacteria or pressure. For what happens when three corpses in velvet begin to decompose in adjacent coffins and press against each other, warping the boards until one splits and fluids mix? You don't want to imagine it. But now you do. And here's this twisted part. It was a mark of status to smell like this. To have your family be able to afford a crypt, to endure the gagging guests, to keep your box dripping beneath holy marble. It meant you mattered. People came to church and lit candles above your oozing tomb. They prayed while your gas bloated up from the floorboards. Every Sunday, they'd sit above you and hear the sermon while the worms below wrote their own gospel. Some crypts were even partially open, displayed for select mourners or pilgrims. You'd be invited down here, like you are now, to view the remains, to light a candle, to whisper a prayer. And you'd pretend not to notice the smell or the stain creeping across the floor. It was considered an honor. You pass another coffin, this one clearly newer if such a thing can even be called new in this place. The nameplate shines slightly, and the scent around it is sharper. The younger rot. The veil of perfume hasn't fully settled. There's a hint of sweetness in the air, saccharine betrayal. The kind of smell that makes your gums ache, like overripe fruit bruised in the sun. Someone next to you gags, quietly. They turn, covering their mouth with a monogrammed kerchief. You do the same. And then you hear it. A creak. Not loud. Not deliberate. Just a soft wooden shift in the dark. It might be the stone. Might be the beams. Or might be something inside, settling. You tell yourself it's nothing. But you take a step back. You've seen the crypt. Or, more accurately, you've smelled it. And now, we must surface again for a moment. Because before the final descent, there is the wake. And as you'll soon learn, no amount of candlelight or ceremony can keep dinner from turning into something truly grotesque. You emerge from the crypt like a ghost, yourself shivering, breath held, skin tinged with the smell of mold and old incense. The sunlight slices across your eyes, and for a brief moment, you feel like you've stepped into a dream. A warped one. Because what's waiting outside the church is not silence, nor solitude, nor some dignified return to mourning. It's dinner. The wake. Not a quiet affair in a dreary room, mind you. No. This is a spectacle. A feast. An event where the guests gather not only to remember the dead, but to perform their own roles in the pageant of grief. And as you rejoin the crowd now repositioned around linen-covered tables groaning under the weight of platters and tankards, you realize something curious. The smell hasn't gone away. It's simply changed. The glamorous illusion that the wake is a celebration of life. A moment to honour the deceased with fine food, music, and noble fellowship. Toasts are made. Bread is broken. Laughter and tears intermingle in elegant symmetry. The shocking reality. You are eating next to a rotting corpse, and no one dares mention it. The body, you see, is still present. In many Bavarian households of the 1700s, it was common for the deceased to attend their own Wakingskonst in their coffin, propped open just enough to see the face. Sometimes even posed, slightly upright in a corner, draped in embroidered shrouds. Guests would nod politely in its direction between mouthfuls of spiced ham and sauerkraut. You approach the table. Pewter plates reflect the flicker of oil lamps. A maid serves you something brown and steaming. You're not hungry, but you take it. Because to refuse is rude. And rudeness in mourning is gossip-worthy. The woman across from you tears a chunk of rye bread with a gloved hand, her other is still clutching a rosary, though the rhythm of her prayers seems to stall every time she catches a whiff of the casked. And oh, you smell it too. The perfume has faded slightly. The herbs stuffed around the corpse are now overwhelmed by the rising heat of mid-afternoon. The body trapped in wool, sealed in a semi-closed boxes, fermenting like an overripe plum. You see a servant pass behind the bier, discreetly sprinkling more dried lavender along the floor. There's little. The food is hearty, meat heavy, spiced generously, which only makes things worse. Fat renders and mingles with the scent of decay. Ale flows freely, chasing down the rising bile. You chew and swallow, and do your best to keep your lips closed, lest a gag become audible. Children scamper underfoot, oblivious. One even tugs on the hem of the priest's robe and asks why Grandpapa smells funny. The priest mutters a blessing, or maybe a curse, and then a toast. A cousin of the deceased, red-faced and trembling, lifts his tankard high. His speech is slurred, but his words are familiar, to a life well lived, to duty to God. People nod solemnly. Someone cries. A chair creaks behind you, and for a moment you think the corpse has moved. You dare a glance. Still dead. But the wig is definitely slipping. You try not to stare at it. But it's impossible. The powdered curls are matted now, sagging with damp. The rouged cheeks have dulled to an earthy grey. The chin is tucked too tight to the chest, giving the appearance of a sulk. Or maybe it's just the gas building again. What's worse, there's a fly. You see it land gently on the edge of the coffin, then skip along the velvet like it owns the place. Another follows, and then another. You can feel your stomach fold in on itself. But you stay, because leaving a wake early, especially a noble one, is social heresy. Your absence will be noted, whispered about, possibly recorded in a cousin's diary for later scorn. So you eat. You smile. You nod at jokes you don't hear, all while sitting 10 feet from a man who is currently leaking into his burial clothes. The why behind this grotesque ritual? It lies in the intersection of hospitality and theology. In Catholic Bavaria, the soul was believed to linger for days after death. 3, at minimum. So wakes were not just social, they were vigilant. A time to watch, to wait, to ensure the soul's safe passage and to provide comfort to the grieving family. The presence of the body reminded everyone of their duty to the dead. And the feast. That was tradition, too fueled by the belief that generosity toward mourners ensured prayers for the deceased. The richer the table, the holier the rest. So yes, the room stinks, but it also sings. Soft lute music plucks at the corners of your hearing. A string quartet near the hearth plays dirges that rise and fall like sighs. Women dab at their eyes. Men grip their tankards like shields. And you. You feel the air shift again. The body has slumped slightly. The cushions under it have begun to collapse inward. The coffin, already straining under heat and time, now sinks just enough to cause a ripple through the surface fabric. You see it. Others do, too, but they pretend not to, because the show must go on. As the plates are cleared and the final prayer is said, you excuse yourself and slip outside. Fresh air, if it can be called that, fills your lungs. Somewhere in the distance, church bells toll again. Another funeral. Perhaps another wake. Another banquet beside a body. You lean against a stone balustrade and close your eyes. But don't relax yet. Because the stink of death is not just in the crypts or the kitchens. It clings to the living, too. To the hair and hands and handkerchiefs of those who dare mourn in a world where decay wears silk and perfume in equal measure. Next, we enter the realm of fashion, a place where mourning attire hides secrets even more grotesque than the feasts. You stand under the low eaves of the manor house, watching the black-clad guests filter out one by one. The wake is over, but the ritual continues, less spiritual now, more theatrical. You notice the rustle of skirts, the shimmer of mourning veils, and the powdered faces catching the last glimmers of afternoon light. From a distance, they look like a painting, poised, sorrowful, elegant. Up close, they smell like an apothecary on fire. The glamorous illusion. That mourning clothes were dignified, beautiful garments, designed to honor the dead and reflect deep inner grief. Yet beads, fine lace, stiff bombays in each piece carefully chosen to show reverence and modesty. The silhouettes may have shifted through the century, but the aim remained the same, to turn grief into a graceful performance. The shocking reality. These outfits were olfactory nightmares. Drenched in perfume, sweat, and the very scent they were trying to ward off, mourning clothes turned their wearers into walking ghosts of mildew and musk. You're close enough now to see how the perfume clings. It's not a dab on the wrist, it's a full-on assault. Floral waters, citrus oil, crushed herbs sewn into the hems. And underneath it, always the human smell, unwashed skin, stress sweat, and the faint trace of every decomposing corpse this outfit has visited before. You see, mourning garments weren't always freshly made. Especially in noble households, they were heirlooms passed down and brought out for every family death. Which meant that gown you're admiring has likely been worn to at least 3 funerals. And while the outside may be brushed and pressed, the linings tell a different story. Imagine wearing a black velvet gown lined with silk, heavy as a curtain, over layers of petticoats and corsets, in the summer heat. Now imagine doing so inside a church crypt, beside an oozing coffin, with no chance to wash the garment between events. You begin to understand the perfume. It's everywhere, soaked into gloves, hats, fans. Mourners wave handkerchiefs not just to dab at tears, but to block the air entirely. Some even discreetly hold orange-studded pomanders to their lips as they pass especially ripe coffins. These were not accessories, they were survival gear. You glance at one woman near the carriages. Her fan is painted black with silver lace trim. She opens and closes it in a slow rhythm, not for flirtation, but for oxygen. Her body is stiff with sweat and resin. As she turns slightly, you see the powder has caked at the temple, forming a greyish crust that clings to the edge of her veil. Under her nose, a trace of something sweet, clove, maybe, or myrrh. You lean closer and realize something even more grim. The scent is coming from inside the veil. Many women dabbed scent directly onto the inner edge of their mourning veils, allowing the fabric to act like a slow-release filter. A wall of lace between their nostrils and the corpse. Because otherwise, they'd faint. And fainting was not elegant, no matter how softly you landed. The why here is deeply entangled in gender, class, and expectations. Mourning wasn't just about sorrow, it was about demonstrating control. Women, especially, were expected to maintain poise, to cry delicately and never, ever let the horror of death show on their faces. Smell was a betrayal. A crack in the mask. So, they bathed in scent to preserve the illusion of grace. And scent, in the 18th century, meant power. Perfume was expensive. It marked you as refined, spiritual, and above all, clean, even when your body told a different story. The irony. Many of the scents used to mask death were derived from things that would make you retch today. Civet sourced from the anal glands of a wild cat, ambergris rotting whale intestines, and musk from deer glands were all common perfume ingredients. So when you pressed that embroidered fan to your nose, you were essentially trading one flavor of rot for another. Still, you'd rather smell like a well-traveled musk deer than the open wound of a nobleman decomposing in full regalia. Men were no better. Their mourning coats were steeped in tobacco and sweat, with collars that trapped the scent of the crypt under their wigs. Some dabbed cologne on their neckcloths. Others simply drank more ale and tried not to notice. But you notice. You always do. And now, the carriage ride. You climb into the lacquered coach, pressed between two distant cousins. The window stays open for ventilation, though it doesn't help. Watch. The seats creak as you settle, your own garments sticking slightly to the upholstery. Someone beside you offers a tin of minced-dried lavender compressed with powdered sugar. You take one and pretend it helps. As the horses clatter down the lane, you realize you can still smell him. The dead man. Hair's not in the coach, but hair's on your sleeves, in your gloves, under your fingernails. Somehow. A clinging presence, floral and fungal, like a perfume gone sour. You turn and look at the cousin across from you. She's crying again. Or maybe she's just overwhelmed. The corners of her eyes have smudged with coal, giving her a hollow, haunted look. Her gloved hands tremble slightly. You wonder if she feels it. Tooth at stench that isn't just outside, but inside now. Seeped into memory. Into skin. As the coach bumps along the road, you watch the distant manor disappear behind the trees. You think you're free. But there's still one more box to open. Because the coffin you saw today was sealed. You saw it. Heard the hinges shut. Watched the edges nailed down. And yet, that seal means nothing. The carriage jostles over a stone bridge, wheels clattering like teeth chattering in a frozen jaw. You're not speaking. No one is. Everyone's just quietly marinating in perfume, sweat, and unspoken horror. You fix your eyes on the landscape, green and serene, pretending none of what just happened is still clinging to your coat. But of course, it is. The manor comes back into view, your temporary lodging, a structure of timber and pride nestled in the woods. It's beautiful, in theory. Wide windows. Stone foundation. A copper weather vane shaped like a lion. You're expected to stay here until the burial is complete out of respect. And respect, in Bavaria, meant watching the coffin until the very end. You are ushered into the drawing room where the body has been moved. Yes, moved again. Not to the churchyard, not to the tomb, but into the house. That's right. The sealed coffin now rests atop a carved oak table in the middle of the family's sitting room, surrounded by candelabras and wreaths. And when you ask very quietly why it hasn't been buried yet, the reply comes in a reverent hush. 3 days vigil. Just in case. Just in case what, you wonder? Just in case he wakes up. The glamorous illusion. That coffins were pristine, sealed vessels beautifully made, lined with satin, and engineered to preserve dignity until burial. That to be placed in a coffin was to be protected, even in death. The shocking reality. Sealed coffins in 18th century Bavaria were hardly that. They were ceremonial, decorative, and often shoddily constructed. And worse, the very act of sealing could trap in the gases and fluids of decomposition, turning them into ticking olfactory bombs. You step closer to the coffin. It's impressive, certainly. The carvings of angels and laurels gleam faintly in the firelight. The handles are wrought iron, dark and filigreed. A small crucifix rests on the lid. The seal looks firm, small nails hammered at precise intervals, wax dripped along the edge. But then you see it. The bubble, near the seam, just where the lid meets the base. The varnish has blistered. A small bump, the size of a fingernail. You reach out, fascinated, repulsed, and stop just short of touching it. Because it's warm. You weren't imagining it. Even from here, you feel a subtle pulse of heat coming off the box. The result of chemical activity, the breakdown of proteins, the fermentation of organs, the expansion of gases that want nothing more than to escape. There's a reason they used to drill holes in coffins. A reason some were vented with tiny decorative grilles, hidden behind motifs of roses or lilies. But this coffin has none of those. It was made to be sealed, locked tight. Because open coffins at wakes had become problematic. You don't ask for details. You already know. In years past, they'd left the coffins open. Not just during wakes, but through days of vigil, prayer, and visits from townspeople. Faces were painted, eyes propped, mouths stuffed with cotton soaked in rose water. But the effect rarely lasted. Once, you heard of a noblewoman whose upper lip sloughed off mid-blessing. Another time, a bishop's eye dislodged during the creed. After that, the lid stayed on. But the lid is a lie. Inside, pressure builds. The gasanthane, ammonia, sulfur dioxide has nowhere to go. The heat inside the sealed box rises. The padding so carefully arranged beneath the head and shoulders becomes a sponge, absorbing what the body expels. The seams begin to warp, and when the wood is soft enough, when the coffin is bowed just slightly, imperceptibly it may hiss. You've heard it happen. A high-pitched squeal, like a kettle just before it whistles. That's not steam. That's decay trying to breathe. Why seal it at all? Then, because appearances mattered more than reality. A sealed coffin looked rich. It implied cleanliness, permanence, and closure. It was a box that said, "We did this right." But really, it was a pressure cooker, a slow, steaming insult to the idea of reverent death. And sometimes they exploded, quietly, but unmistakably. Usually it started with a creak, followed by a split, and then a slow, weeping ooze from the corner joints. The worst cases involved full-on ruptures, wood cracking apart, the lid flung slightly open by the internal build-up. Families would rush in, plug the seams with wax, and add more herbs. Some even poured melted tallow into the split to reseal it. Imagine that, hot fat poured onto a coffin to fix a leaking nobleman. You're staring at the lid now, certain it's moving. It isn't. Not yet. But there's a smell new, sharp and utterly unnatural, like metal left in a damp cellar, or the water that pools in the bottom of a butcher's cart. You shift away, hand pressed over your nose. Someone behind you clears their throat. The widow. She approaches, face veiled, gloved hands folded, delicately. She reaches into a pouch and draws out a small pouch, a satchel of lavender, crushed sage and powdered charcoal. Without a word, she places it gently on the lid of the coffin. Not as decoration, as a warning. You wonder how many times she's done this. How many family funerals she's sat through. How many sealed coffins she's smelled, slowly cooking in the corner of her parlour. You meet her eyes through the veil, and behind the sorrow, you think you see it, the exhaustion of pretending the smell isn't real. And yeah, you continue pretending. Because to speak of it would make it real. To say the coffin is leaking is to accuse the family of failing in dignity. To say he smells is to break the unspoken pact everyone has agreed to, that funerals are clean. That death is clean. That grief can be pretty if you just hold your breath long enough. You return to your chair and stare at the flames. They flicker. The scent thickens. A cousin whispers something about dinner being delayed. You don't respond. You just keep your eyes on that blistered seam, because eventually it will give. But first there's the waiting game. Not for burial. Not for the priest. Not even for the guests. No, next is the strange, morbid tradition that dares to hold the body longer than it should, in case he wakes up. You wake in a cold sweat. For a moment, you don't remember where you are. The room is unfamiliar, damp, and lit only by the coals in the hearth. Then it hits you. You're in a guest chamber of the manor. Downstairs, in the drawing room, the coffin is still there. Still sealed. Still warm. And still not buried. You rise and crack the door open. The corridor is hushed, but not empty. Two servants move silently in the gloom, one carrying a candlestick, the other a basin of water. They nod as they pass, as if to say, "Yes, this is normal. This is what we do." You step into the hallway and follow the faint scent of rosemary and wood polish back toward the staircase. You don't even realize you're heading toward the coffin until you're standing in the threshold again, watching it rest like some grotesque centerpiece in a room frozen by fear. It's the middle of the second night, and no one has buried him. The glamorous illusion that the delay in burial is an act of solemn reverence, the final grace period, a holy pause to ensure that no mistake is made and no soul is lost in haste. The shocking reality. You're trapped in a room with a corpse that everyone suspects might be alive and that no one wants to test, just in case they're wrong. Welcome to the waiting game. In 18th century Bavaria, a deep-rooted fear of premature burial haunted even the wealthiest households. Stories of people waking in their coffins or worse, clawing at the lids after interment circulated in both peasant villages and noble salons. Entire books were published detailing real cases of the undead, and churches encouraged families to hold vigil for at least 3 days to ensure no mistaken deaths. Hence, the Lechen Horse, or corpse room. You're in one now. A space designed not to honour the dead, but to monitor them. Family members and sometimes even hired watchers are expected to sit with the body day and night, checking for signs of life. A flicker of breath. A twitch of the fingers. A change in colour. Some even placed mirrors under the nostrils or tied string to the finger, connected to a small bell. Yes, really. The death bell. So that, should the corpse stir, they could ring themselves back to life. You look closer at the coffin, and there it is. A thin white thread, tied delicately around the ring finger, trailing through a tiny gap in the lid's edge and vanishing behind the candelabra. You follow the line with your eyes until you find the bell's maul, silver and motionless. For now. You feel your stomach churn. Not because you believe hell wake up, but because someone did. Someone once did. And that story has lived in this house ever since. Imagine it now. A family gathered like this. All hushed grief and perfumed silence. Then the bell rings. At first, it's dismissed as a breeze. Then again. Then panic. The coffin lid is wrenched open, only to reveal a face twisted not in death but in horror. That's why they wait. Because one false burial is one too many. You sit down. The cushion beneath you is damp. Of course it is. The room has absorbed the air from the coffin. The velvet curtains sag with it. The table legs beneath the casket glisten with moisture, though no one speaks of that, either. A maid brings tea. Not for comfort, for alertness. The watchers must stay awake. Sleep could mean missing the single breath that signals life. You sip, but it's bitter, full of burnt herbs and something sharp, like bark. The hours crawl. At some point, someone opens a window. The cold night air rushes in, and for a moment, it almost clears the stench. Then it returns, stronger. Like the coffin itself is resentful of the interruption. You swear the thread trembles. You tell yourself it's the draft. Why do they persist in this madness? Because theology again. The soul was believed to linger, sometimes confused, sometimes trapped. To bury a person too early risked sending them to purgatory or worse, leaving them in their flesh while their soul watched from above, helpless, waiting ensured peace, both for the dead and the living. But there's also pride. Imagine being the family that buried a man alive. That kind of story doesn't fade. It infects generations. It stains your name like a bad marriage or a heretical uncle. Better to wait. Better to suffer the smell and the silence and the sleepless nights than to become a tale whispered in pews for the next 100 years. You rest your head back against the chair. Your eyes close briefly. And that's when you hear it. The bell. A single tinglight. Clear. Impossible. Your body freezes. Eyes wide. Mouth dry. You look to the others. But no one moves. Either they didn't hear it, or they refuse to. You stand, slowly. Every part of you screams not to, but you do. You step forward, toward the bell. It doesn't ring again. You glance at the thread. It's slack. You tell yourself it must have caught on something. The wood shifted. The breeze. Something, anything else. But your hand is already on the coffin lid. You could lift it. You shouldn't. The room is still. And just as your fingertips graze the edge of the wood, the widow appears. Dunt, she whispers. You back away, not because you believe the man is alive, but because you're no longer sure what's inside that coffin is entirely dead. Better to wait. Another night. Another vigil. Another round of candles and whispered prayers and lavender crushed beneath booth heels. The stink will worsen. The illusion will weaken. But you'll cling to it, because the alternative is far more terrifying than a bloated corpse. It's a breathing one, and if he is still alive, you do not want to see what has become. Next, we go to the other extreme, not the noble dead, but the forgotten ones, the poor, the nameless, the buried too fast and buried too shallow. And they're not sealed. You awaken not to the bell, but to silence ethic and unnatural, as if the air itself is waiting. You stumble back into your clothes and down the stairwell, half expecting to find the coffin gone, the room cleared, the nightmare ended. But no, the coffin still rests on the table. The bell, unmoved. The smell richer now. Settled. Less like perfume, more like something old and fermenting beneath the floorboards. You don't stay. You can't. Instead, you step outside into the biting Bavarian dawn. Frost laces the grass. The sky is a dull silver, and the only sound is the caw of crows perched on the crumbling stone wall that divides the manor's land from the Gobberfield, the Pause field. You trudge down the winding path toward the lowlands, your boots squelching in the morning muck. You've heard the term, before Gobberfield. It sounds almost poetic. But when you arrive, the illusion collapses. There are no polished stones here, no statues, no crypts with wrought iron doors, just dirt, mounds, and the occasional crooked plank, marking a name already fading, the glamorous illusion that even the poor received some form of respectable burial. A cross, a prayer, a patch of consecrated earth. The shocking reality. They were buried quickly, shallowly, sometimes half wrapped in the clothes they died in. And if the grave was full of time was short, they were stacked. You walk between the mounds. The ground is uneven, riddled with depressions. Some sunken from rain, others from what lies lay beneath. The smell here is different. Not perfumed. Not masked. Just honest. Wet soil. What? Faint traces of human grease rising through the earth. A man nearby older, face like a dried apple ends on a shovel. The grave digger. He nods to you, his mouth curling into something between a smile and a wince. You come from the big house. It isn't a question. You nod. He gestures to a shallow ditch behind him. This one's fresh. You peer over the edge. The earth is soft and clumpy, dark. You expect to see a coffin. There isn't one. Just a form, wrapped loosely in linen, already soaking through with morning dew. You don't bury in a box. You ask, trying to keep your voice neutral. He shrugs. Boxes are for saints and lords. This one's got no one. No one. The idea chills you more than the cold wind. You take a step back. The air is suddenly thick again, not from incense, but from sheer, unfiltered humanity. Fluids. Decay. The sharp tang of something animal. Something that doesn't belong to the forest. You glance toward the edge of the field and see a dog sniffing one of the mounds. Its nose dips. It paws lightly at the earth. You look away. You're not supposed to see that part. But it happens. A lot. Gobberfelders were usually unguarded. The poor had no family tombs, no stone enclosures. The only thing separating their remains from the open world was 6 feet of soft earth, and most of the time, it wasn't even 6. In winter, the ground froze. Digging was hard. Graves got shallower. Bodies were laid hastily, sometimes not covered until the sun thawed the soil days later. In summer, the problem reversed. The heat sped up decomposition. The smell brought animals. And scavengers, both 2-legged and 4, knew where to look. It wasn't unheard of to find bones on the path, to see a hand protruding after a storm, to step in something that wasn't mud. The why behind it all. Poverty was not just a lack of money, it was a lack of ritual, a lack of space, a lack of time. The church gave the poor burial ground, yes, but it gave them the corners, the muddy patches, the slopes where water pooled and graves eroded. They received prayers in bulk, recited quickly, without names. They were interred not to be remembered but to be out of the way. The illusion of dignity was maintained only at a distance. But if you got closer, if you walked the field after rain, if you followed the crouse, you saw the truth, and the truth smelled like boiled rags and soured milk. The gravedigger waves you toward a small wooden shack. Inside, on a rickety shelf, is a row of small tin bowls. Salt, he says. We pack it under the chin. Helps a bit. You blink. Helps with what? He grins, toothless. Smell. Bugs. Sometimes if you leave it long enough, dries him right out, like jerky. You feel your stomach roll again, but he's not joking. The poor were sometimes salted in lieu of embalming. A handful of salt to the gut cavity, if it was opened. A sprinkle under the tongue. A layer over the face, if it was going to be seen. But here no one will see them again, except maybe the dogs. You step back out into the light. The sun is higher now, but the field remains dim. The trees keep it shadowed. You watch your breath ghost into the cold morning and wonder how many bodies lie beneath your feet, and how many are still intact. You turn back toward the manor, toward the perfumed decay of noblemen and the velvet-draped wakes. But this is something else. And covered through. And yet, despite everything, the poor didn't fear death any less. In fact, they had rituals of their own. Strange, sensory ones. Some involving smell. Because in Bavaria, scent wasn't just a cover-up. It was communication. It meant something. And that meaning of perfume, of putrefaction, of sacred incense was different for every soul. So next, we follow the sniffers. The holy ones. The strange ones. The ones who claimed they could smell a sinner. You find yourself standing just outside the church again, the dawn mist curling around the carved stone like a ghostly shawl. The grand fade, solemn and imposing, looms over the square, but your attention is pulled elsewhere to the heavy wooden door, slightly ajar, revealing a dim interior thick with the mingled scents of melted wax, ancient stone, and something else. Something far less pleasant. You step inside, and the air wraps around you like a damp cloak. There's a scent here, layered and complex, the sharp resin of burning incense, the musky tang of old velvet cushions, and beneath it all, a pervasive odour of damp earth and decay that seeps from the crypt below. It's a smell you didn't notice outside, but now can't escape. The glamorous illusion. The church is a sanctuary, a place of purity, holiness, and sacred rest. A refuge from the corruption of the world, where death is transformed into eternal peace through prayer, ritual, and consecrated ground. The shocking reality. The church itself is a living vessel of odours both sacred and profane. Its walls, soaked with centuries of prayers and smoke, cannot hide the presence of death fermenting beneath. The crypts below are damp and dark, where the physical remains mingle with mould, moisture, and the slow creep of rot. Here, in 18th century Bavaria, the church was as much a mausoleum as a house of worship. The crypts were repositories not only of the dead, but of an almost tangible miasma, an invisible fog of decomposing flesh and ancient dust that clung to the walls and filled every nook. You move toward the altar, where priests stand in black cassocks, swinging censers that send plumes of frankincense curling through the air. The smoke is supposed to purify, to sanctify, to protect the living from spiritual contamination. But there's an irony here. This same smoke struggles to cover the more earthly contamination below. You watch as the priest carefully inspects the floorboards near the crypt's entrance. This isn't merely routine. In Bavaria, superstition dictated that the church itself could become a battleground between sanctity and decay. If too many bodies fermented below, the miasma of corrupt air might seep upward, poisoning prayers and sickening worshippers. Because of the miasma theory, the dominant medical belief of the time, which held that diseases were spread by bad air, putrid smells and vapours arising from decay. The foul scents were not just unpleasant, they were dangerous, and death, especially in concentrated places like crypts, was thought to be a source of this poisonous atmosphere. The clergy took precautions. Candles were burned endlessly to purify the air. Walls were whitewashed frequently. Incense was scattered liberally. But no amount of smoke could fully erase the scent of the dead pressed beneath stone and timber. You sniff at the edge of a pew, catching a faint note of dampness and something faintly metallic like the iron nails hammered into the coffin lids. It's a scent that tells stories of bodies trapped beneath earth, of wood swelling with moisture, of the inevitability of breakdown. The air seems to thicken as the mass proceeds. The choir sings in Latin, their voices rising and falling like waves. You hear whispered prayers and the soft clink of rosaries. But beneath it all is the stench. A holy stench. The priests carry on, swinging their censers like sacred swords against the invisible enemy. But you realize something else. If the congregation has grown accustomed to the smell. It is part of the ritual, a sensory reminder of mortality and the frailty of flesh. One elder woman, seated near the front, holds a small vial of oil. She presses it under her nose at intervals, a blend of rosemary and lavender. You notice the faint sheen of sweat on her brow, and the way she seems to lean into the scent as a shield against something darker. You wonder, could the smell itself be a form of communication? A way to sense the boundary between life and death, purity and corruption, salvation and damnation. As the Mass concludes, the priest intones a blessing over the altar, the smoke swirling like a protective veil. The congregation begins to disperse, their footsteps echoing on the stone floor. You pause near the entrance, your nose still tingling with the mingled odours of earth and incense. Outside, the world waits alive, vibrant, and oblivious to the invisible battle just beneath their feet. You step back into the sunlight, but the scent lingers in your mind. And as you walk away, you can't help but think of the watchers, the priests, the mourners, the curious who tried to sniff out the truth behind death itself. Next, we meet them. The sniffers, those who claimed the power to smell the soul's fate. You find yourself drawn again to the graveyard's edge, where the poor were buried without pomp or ceremony. The cool morning air carries a sharpness, a scent of damp earth mixed with decaying leaves. Here, the smell of death is not masked by incense or perfume, it is raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. In this shadowed place, the distinction between life and death blurs further. The community has long feared that the soul lingers after death, restless and wandering until properly laid to rest. But how to know? How to tell if a corpse is truly dead or trapped somewhere between? Enter these sniffers. In 18th century Bavaria, a strange and secretive group of individuals emerged, those who believed they could detect the condition of a soul through smell alone. Called Lechenskor, or corpse watchers, they claimed a supernatural ability to discern purity, sin, or even undeath by breathing in the scent of the dying or the dead. You watch as a gaunt figure approaches a fresh grave. His eyes are sharp, and he carries no tools, but a small bundle of herbs and a leather pouch of charred wood. The villagers step back, whispering in hushed tones. The sniffer kneels beside the grave, drawing a deep breath through his nostrils. His face contorts as he inhales the mix of earth, rot, and faint sweetness. He mutters prayers under his breath, the words barely audible. The glamorous illusion that death was a silent crossing, a peaceful passage from this world to the next, marked by solemnity and grace. The shocking reality: death was noisy, odorous, and sometimes deceptive. The dead might smell like the earth itself, or they might carry the unmistakable reek of corruption, signalling unrest or punishment. The sniffers believed that the smell of decay was not uniform. Some odors meant peace, the gentle sweetness of lavender or rosemary heralding a soul at rest. Others signaled danger, sulphurous fumes, acrid sourness, or the sharp bite of ammonia, indicating sin, possession, or spiritual unrest. This belief was rooted in a mix of folk medicine, Catholic theology, and the miasma theory. The body's scent was thought to reflect the soul's state. A pure soul might keep decay at bay longer. A damned soul would hasten putrefaction. The sniffer's role was twofold: to confirm death and to detect signs of lingering unrest. In some villages, they were called upon during funerals, their noses pressed close to the corpse's mouth or nose, inhaling deeply while the family waited anxiously. You see the sniffer take out a small candle, lighting it carefully and wafting the smoke over the corpse's face. The interplay of scent and smoke was said to coax the soul out or at least reveal its presence. Sometimes, if the smell was wrong, they recommended exhumation and reburial or additional prayers and rituals to calm the spirit. The villagers treat the sniffers with a mix of fear and reverence. Some call them witches, others see them as necessary guardians against the horrors of the restless dead. You watch as a mother brings her child forward, whispering urgently. The sniffer inhales near the boy's neck and forehead, then nods. The child is alive, but sick. The scent of decay would be unmistakable if it were otherwise. You realize how tightly woven these beliefs were into the fabric of daily life. Death was not a private affair, it was a sensory experience, shared, feared, and managed communally. As the sniffer moves away, you notice his own hands are stained blackened by the charred wood he carries, scented with herbs that ward off evil. He pauses to wipe his brow, and then disappears into the mist. You breathe deeply, trying to capture the mixture of earth and herbs, decay and incense. It's overwhelming, but there's something intimate about it, a way scent carries memory, emotion, and belief. And in this, you see a truth about 18th century Bavaria: death was never just an ending. It was a presence. A smell. A story told in layers of perfume and rot. As you turn back toward the village, you feel the air shift once more, carrying a faint trace of something floral yet bitter. The smell of mourning, of power, of fear, and the promise of more secrets to uncover. Next, we meet those who lived closest to death, the priests who faced it daily, armed only with incense and faith. You step back inside the church, your footsteps muffled against worn stone. The air here is dense with the scent of burning incense, sharp, resinous aroma that curls and twists like smoke tendrils reaching for the rafters. This is the domain of the priests, the guardians of both the living and the dead, who carry the burden of mediating between the two. The glamorous illusion. Priests are calm, composed, sanctified men who wield divine power to protect the congregation from evil and to ensure the peaceful passage of souls. The shocking reality. They endure the worst smells imaginable hour after hour, day after day. They carry the weight of death not only spiritually but physically, inhaling the sour miasma that seeps up from crypts, brushing past coffins and clinging to their robes like a second skin. You watch a priest enter, swathed in a thick black cassock layered beneath an embroidered surplice. His eyes are tired, but focused as he approaches the altar. In one hand, he carries a theorably and ornate censer swung on chains that releases spirals of fragrant smoke. The smell of frankincense and myrrh is meant to sanctify and purify. It masks the stench of decay, but only just. Beneath the sweetness, you detect the bitter trace of mold and damp stone. This is the smell of constant battle, sacred smoke trying to hold back rot. You follow the priest as he moves toward the crypt entrance. He pauses, lifts the heavy wooden door, and swings the theorable inside. The smoke spills into the darkness, but the dank air presses back. He breathes deeply, then begins his prayers, intoning in Latin as the censer's chains clang softly. You notice his hands calloused, stained with soot and incense resin. He clutches a bundle of dried herbsage, rosemary, ruse to ward off evil spirits and purify the air. These herbs are not decoration. They are weapons in a sensory war against death's scent. You wonder how many funerals he has attended. How many times he has knelt beside a coffin and tried to breathe through the smell of fermenting flesh. His voice rises and falls in the dim light. The words are shield against the inevitable. He knows the science of decay is beyond his power, but his faith demands the fight. The why is as much practical as spiritual. The priests understood the dangers of miasma, not just superstition, but a real threat to health. They believed the foul air carried disease, and so they developed rituals to combat it. Burning incense, whitewashing walls, and endless prayers were all part of a system designed to protect the living. Yet, despite the smoke and song, the smell follows. You recall tales whispered among townsfolk, priests fainting mid-mass, overcome by the stench. Others who wore cloths soaked in vinegar beneath their vestments. Some even carried small bottles of perfume to breathe between prayers. As the mass ends, the priest approaches the coffin again. He presses a cloth to his face, lavender-scented, but barely enough. His eyes meet yours briefly, and you see exhaustion there. He bows his head and whispers a final blessing, then slowly closes the crypt door. You step back into the sunlight, the scent of incense fading but not gone. You realize these men are the frontline soldiers in a war, fought with smoke and scent. And behind the mourners, the watchers, the relatives, all struggling with their own battles against the odor of death. Next, we glimpse the widow, a figure draped in black whose veil is both a shield and a statement, hiding a world of secrets and fears. You find her standing alone near the churchyard gate, a solitary figure swathed in heavy black silk, her veil pulled low over her face. The widow. A presence both commanding and fragile, her mourning attire a careful armor against the world and, more importantly, against the smell that clings to her like a shadow. The glamorous illusion. The widow's veil is a symbol of modesty, respect, and grief. It frames her face with elegance, signaling her sorrow and her status as the keeper of memory. The shocking reality. That veil serves a far more practical purpose, to shield her from the stench of death she encounters daily, especially when attending to her husband's corpse. It traps the thick scent of rot and perfume close to her skin, but keeps the worst at bay from her lungs. You watch as she lifts the delicate lace and presses a handkerchief soaked in rosewater and cloves to her nose. The fragrance is strong, almost medicinal. It's a barrier, a desperate attempt to breathe through layers of decay. Her gloves are embroidered, but you notice the faint dark stain on the cuff, a telltale sign of fluids that have seeped from the coffin during the wake and vigil. The stain is ignored by all but her, a quiet reminder of the grotesque intimacy shared between the living and the dead. The smell follows her, even when she moves away. It is as if the scent of her husband's decay has soaked into the very fabric of her being. She walks slowly, carefully avoiding puddles in the courtyard. Her steps are measured, almost ritualistic. Each movement is a negotiation with the reality of death's physicality, made bearable only by the thick layers of cloth and scent she wears. The why of this is tied deeply to social expectations. Widows in 18th century Bavaria were expected to demonstrate unwavering devotion, wearing mourning clothes for months, sometimes years, maintaining the ritual of grief as both public spectacle and personal penance. Their appearance was a performance of loyalty and endurance. But behind that performance lay fear. Fear of fainting. Fear of vomiting. Fear of the unbearable truth beneath the veils of ceremony. The veil also hid the fact that many widows suffered in silence from the sensory onslaught. The stench seeped into their homes, their beds, their bodies. It was impossible to escape the reminder that death was not a distant event, but a daily companion. You see her pause near a small wooden shrine adorned with candles and dried flowers. She crosses herself and murmurs a prayer, the words trembling on her lips. Then, almost imperceptibly, she inhales deeply through her perfumed veil, as if drawing strength from the scent itself. She is both protector and prisoner of the funeral's sensory world. Nearby, other mourners gather, their faces pale, their eyes glazed from days of sleepless vigils and suffocating smells. They exchange quiet words, but no one speaks openly about the smell. It is a shared secret, unspoken but deeply felt. You imagine what it must be like to carry that weight daily, to live enveloped in the odor of death, softened only by layers of cloth and perfume. And yet, she endures, because mourning is not just grief. It is duty. It is identity. It is the last performance in a long tradition of death rituals that bind the living to the dead. As the sun dips low, casting long shadows across the courtyard, you watch the widow turn and disappear into the manor, her veil trailing like a dark cloud. You follow at a distance, knowing the night will bring more silence, more waiting, more scent. Next, we step into the crowded rooms of mourners, where the smell of death festers not just in coffins, but in bodies pressed too close, too long. You step into the crowded parlour where mourners have gathered, black-clad bodies packed tight, swaying gently to the faint murmur of whispered prayers and muffled sobs. The room feels smaller than it should, as if the weight of grief is pressing on the walls, squeezing the air thick with heat, sweat, and something far more unsettling. The glamorous illusion. Mourning gatherings are solemn, refined occasions marked by quiet dignity and shared sorrow. Gentle hands clasp rosaries, voices speak in hushed tones of love and loss. The shocking reality. The smell. It's everywhere. Lingering on skin and breath, clinging to hair and fabric. The stifling blend of unwashed bodies, sweat-soaked silks, and the inevitable residue of proximity to decay. You can almost taste it heavy, sour, a mix of musk and mildew that coats the back of your throat. You try to find space near a window, but it's crowded. Every face is pale, eyes red-rimmed and glassy. The women's veils stick to their cheeks, the men's wigs damp at the nape of their necks. You catch the faintest hint of something sweet lavender, perhaps pressed between the shadows of the room, as if the mourners cling to any scent that might push back against the rot. The why is simple, but brutal. There was no such thing as personal hygiene in mourning. No showers between wakes, no fresh changes of clothing. Grief demanded endurance and presence, not comfort. Mourners often stayed for days in these rooms, too afraid to leave, too expected to remain. Their bodies sweat and mingle in the heat. The perfume and incense only mask the inevitable smells of humanity's stale sweat, sour breath, the faint but undeniable presence of death that leaches out of the coffin and into the crowd. You notice an elderly man near the hearth, his hands trembling as he wipes his forehead on a threadbare handkerchief. His breath is shallow, eyes darting nervously. He shifts closer to a woman nearby, who offers him a pinch of mint and a soft smile. You wonder how many have already fainted here, overwhelmed by the mingling scents and suffocating air. The room is a pressure cooker of emotions and odours, a sensory trap from which there is no easy escape. As a musician strikes up a dirge on a violin, the crowd sways in mournful rhythm. The scent seems to pulse with the music thickening, then receding, like a living thing. You see a child nestled in a corner, cheeks flushed, eyes wide with confusion. She clutches a small doll, its fabric worn and smelling faintly of the same perfume that fills the room. The child sneezes quietly, and a woman hushes her with a whispered prayer. The room is both a sanctuary and a prison. Outside, the summer sun beats down mercilessly, but here inside, time slows, and the smells grow heavy. You take a deep breath, holding it just long enough to avoid the worst. Your skin prickles, your head swims slightly. And yet, no one leaves, because to abandon the mourners is to abandon the dead. To endure the smell is to endure grief itself. And as the evening deepens, the coffin's presence becomes a ghostly pulse beneath the floorboards, a reminder that death is not just a moment, but a lingering atmosphere. You step back, your senses saturated, your heart heavy. Next, we confront the myths and realities of the mausoleum, final resting place promised as eternal peace, but often a slow, sunlit stew. You stand before the grand mausoleum at the edge of the cemetery, an imposing stone edifice bathed in late afternoon sun, its white marble fade gleaming against the dark pines. It promises eternal rest, smooth floors, ventilated chambers, and a sense of reverent permanence. Families paid fortunes for these above-ground tombs, believing they'd outlast weather, vermin, and time itself. The glamorous illusion. A mausoleum is the pinnacle of funerary architecture, a sanctuary built to honor the dead, a temple of remembrance where bodies lie in peaceful slumber, perfectly preserved. It's meant to be aired. Pristine space, untouched by soil or scavenger. A stone reliquary shielding loved ones from the messy realities of decomposition. The shocking reality. Sunlight and stone do little to halt decay. In fact, the heat that warms the marble can accelerate putrefaction within. You step through the wrought iron gate, and inhale a faint hiss greets you, like air escaping a slow leak. You follow the sound to a small bronze grille near the base of the central crypt door. Beneath it, inside the sealed chamber, air is pushing out, warm and tight with a cloying sweetness. You edge closer. The marble floor, meant to be cool and clean, feels sticky underfoot. The air inside the mausoleum is heavy, each breath a negotiation between floral tribute wreaths lining the walls and the deeper undertone of something fermenting. You would expect the scent of polished stone and lilies, but instead you smell overripe fruit left in the sun, thick and unctuous, mingled with a whisper of mould. Inside, the coffins rest, on stone shelves carved into the walls. Each is polished, varnished, and labelled with names and dates. In theory, these vaults were designed to circulate air through hidden ducts, but the systems often clogged with dust and webs. Corpses leaned into their plush linings, their own warmth feeding the microbial feast inside. You notice one coffin's lid is bowed, the wood soft where joints meet. A faint crack runs across its surface, from which a yellowish droplet seeps. Nearby, A cluster of flies hovers. Their wings catch the light, tiny prisms dancing in the gloom. The families who paid for these crypts believed mausoleums would elevate their dead above earthly corruption, but the truth is a slow, sunlit stew. Heat seeps through the marble, condenses on the cool interior, and drips into the coffins. Fabrics trap moisture, cosmetics and hair powders become substrates for mold, bones dry in spots and turn to brittle fragments in others. The why behind this grand deception lies in social ambition. Erecting a mausoleum was a public statement of one's legacy, a claim to immortality in stone. The illusion of permanence was more important than the uncomfortable truths of biology. Even the church often endorsed these edifices, as they brought funds and grandeur to sacred grounds. You lean against a column, wiping your brow on a linen handkerchief that already smells faintly of lavender and something fouler. You think of the family vaults you've encountered today, the cramped church crypt, the makeshift corpse room in a parlour, the humble pauper's earth grave. Each bore its own stench, its own grotesque compromise. But the mausoleum betrays perhaps the greatest irony. In trying to seal out decay, it becomes a greenhouse for it. A shaft of late sun falls across a guestbook and quill left on a small pedestal, a reminder that future generations will visit, write their condolences and retire to the courtyard, oblivious to the odor that clings to the marble like a secret. They will speak of artistry, of reverence, of eternal rest. They will not smell the slow bubble of gas swelling behind those brass handles. You exhale, tasting the stale air, and realize that death's aroma is democratic. It seeps through coated stones, powdered wigs, lavish veils, and humble linen shrouds. No barrier can block it completely. As you step back into the sunlit courtyard, the promise of permanence dissolves like a whispered prayer. Behind you, the mausoleum stands proud, its secret contained for now. And soon, we'll slow our paces, often our words into the wind down of this journey through scent, ceremony, and the gross truths that hide behind history's elegant fades. You pause at the foot of an imposing stone sarcophagus, set apart from the rest in its own alcove beneath a frescoed ceiling. This is the family mausoleum, sanctified by bishops' blessing and sealed with the family crest carved into its marble fade. It is meant to be the pinnacle of funerary honour, a private chapel, a shrine, a vessel of unending reverence. You place your hand on the cool stone. From deep within, you sense the faint hum of warmth, and beneath the carved lid, you know, lies the promise of eternal rest. The glamorous illusion, a mausoleum is engineered to defy nature. The polished chambers, the hidden vents, and the thick walls of stone all speak of permanence. Here, the body is meant neither to mingle with earth nor attract the beasts of the field. The air flows silently through discreet grays, carrying incense and floral tributes, never foul odours. Light filters in through stained glass windows, bathing the marble in a holy glow. It is a cathedral to the dead. The shocking reality. Stone cannot hold back biology. Heat from the sun seeps in through the walls, condenses on internal surfaces, and drips into the coffins. The faint breeze through the vents is too weak to disperse the gases building below, carbon dioxide soaked with the sweetness of fermenting tissue. Ammonia's stinging bite, the sulphurous whisper of rotten eggs. The air inside is static, a greenhouse for decay. You crouch by one of the side niches and examine a small ventilation grill. Through the bronze bars, you catch a glimpse of swelling drapery beneath from the linens that line the coffin. Fat and moisture have soaked through, leaving puckers in the fabric. The seams of the polished lid are already stained, yellow trails where putrid fluids have escaped, gravity pulling them downward like tears. A trickle pooled at the corners before creeping along the stone shelf. You inhale carefully, as though you can separate the layers. First, the tang of cool marble, then the damp musk of wilted wreaths, and finally, the deep, cloying undertone of human flesh breaking down, a scent both sweet and sour, like fruit left too long in the sun. Even the decorative urns of rose petals and frankincense crystals cannot keep it at bay. The petals have wilted, the crystals have absorbed moisture, and dissolved into a sticky syrup. What was once an offering of beauty is now part of the stew. Why this contradiction? Because mausoleums were as much monuments to power as to piety. Building one signalled wealth, lineage, and a defiance of natural order. It told the world, our name will not vanish with the flesh. Wave bought forever in stone. Church authorities blessed these edifices too, since they drew pilgrims, donations, and prestige. And yet, nature laughs at stone. Bacteria and fungi feast on the body regardless of architectural flourish. The sealed environment intensifies the process. Wood warps, seals bow, and sometimes the families hastily repair the cracks. The lid will shift, releasing a soft hiss as gas escapes. A righteous family once attempted to whitewash the interior annually, but the paint peeled in damp patches and masked nothing. You stand and step back into the waning light. Behind you, the mausoleum doors swing closed with a finality meant to comfort. But you carry the scent with you on your skin, in your hair, a ghost of decay that no stone can hold at bay. And now, as our journey through 18th century Bavaria's funeral customs draws to a close, let's slow the pace and soften our language, drawing the final curtains on a world where mourning was equal parts theatre, superstition and olfactory endurance. Let your breathing ease, as twilight deepens outside and the last echoes of cathedral bells fade. You've wandered through perfumed processions and candlelit crypts, felt the damp chill of underground vaults and stood before gleaming marble that could not still the ancient hunger of decay. Now, imagine the cool night air brushing your face here, reprieve from the heavy scents that clung like shadows. Picture yourself stepping into a quiet garden beyond the stone walls, where moonlight shimmers on dew-kissed petals. The sharp tang of rot recedes into memory, replaced by the gentler fragrance of jasmine and night-blooming flowers. In this peaceful grove, you may hear only soft rustles in the leaves and the distant call of an owl, a reminder that life persists, even after sorrow's long vigil. Recall the widow's quiet courage, the priests who battled miasma with their censers, the humble gravedigger who salted the poor to spare them the cruelest indignities. Each ritual, no matter how grotesque, was born of love and effort to honor the dead, safeguard the living, and find meaning amid the inevitable dissipation of flesh and memory. Rest now in the knowledge that today's funerary rites have changed. Embalming, refrigeration, and burial vaults guard secrets better than 18th century stone, but the human heart still seeks ceremony, closure, and the assurance that even in death, we remain connected through memory, ritual, and love. So, lean back, feel the softness of your pillow, and let the world of coffins and crypts dissolve into dreams. May your sleep be sweet, untroubled by the sense of history's hidden truths. Good night, dear friend, and sweet dreams.